Once upon a time, the highest honor a citizen could claim was the willingness to protect some abstract value, something that couldn't be packaged or purchased. They believed a nation built on principles was worth defending. But now, we're taught that constant spending is the best way to support the country. Instead of a nation of citizens, we became a nation of consumers. Our relationship to America slowly transformed from, "What can I give to make this place better?" to, "What can this place give me in exchange for loyalty or compliance?" The commitment that once flowed toward ideals like liberty, shared sacrifice, and civic duty has been twisted into maintaining quarterly earnings and GDP growth. Patriotism has been replaced with patronage. But what happens to people when purpose is replaced with consumption? Where meaning becomes something you have to buy to feel. That is the story of America in the last century, and that is where we begin. Patriot culture, what America used to value. Before America became a marketplace with a flag, it was founded on the belief that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when united by principles. Patriotism meant contributing to something bigger than yourself, without any guarantee of reward. Our history isn't perfect, and it wasn't inclusive of everyone. There was still exploitation and inequality. However, people did have a sense of purpose, rooted in responsibility, rather than convenience. During the Revolutionary War, farmers, merchants, and craftsmen, people who had every logical incentive to mind their own business and avoid conflict, risked their safety, their savings, and sometimes their lives, not for a paycheck or a tax break, but for an ideal most of them would never personally benefit from: self-governance. They fought not because it was profitable, but because it was meaningful. They were fighting to build a country they would never fully experience, and they did it anyway. And virtue was abundant during World War II, not just in soldiers on battlefields, but in the daily lives of civilians who rationed sugar, rubber, and gasoline, who planted victory gardens and bought war bonds out of modest paychecks. They accepted discomfort and inconvenience because the collective mattered more than individual desire. The narrative wasn't "consume to do your part," but "sacrifice to do your part." Or take the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great Depression. Millions of young men left home not to climb a corporate ladder, but to restore forests, build trails, and prevent erosion. Patriotism then meant taking pride in creating something that would outlive you and would improve the lives of strangers you would never meet. And with the Civil Rights Movement, Black Americans confronted violence, humiliation, imprisonment, and death solely because they believed the country could and should hold to higher values. Finally, the Apollo program reflected a society that valued collective curiosity worth years of extreme effort, risk, and public spending. The moon landing wasn't advertised as a purchase. It was celebrated as a triumph of imagination, discipline, and collaboration. Proof that what held Americans together wasn't what they owned, but what they could do together. I'm not romanticizing the past, but recognizing that there was a time when American life felt meaningful, where people had a clear source of identity and pride, rooted in contribution rather than accumulation. Next, we'll see how that purpose has been diluted, redirected, and monetized until citizens became just consumers. The shift, turning patriots into patrons. The shift from patriot to patron culture didn't happen because Americans lost their morality or became lazier. It happened because the people in power, in government, in industry, and in advertising, discovered that a population motivated by ideals is harder to control than one motivated by desire. A citizen who wants to serve the country asks questions and expects accountability, but a consumer who is only concerned with buying things asks for faster shipping and lower monthly payments. I believe this shift began after World War II, when the United States faced the question, what do you do with a society that has been conditioned for sacrifice and high civic engagement once the war is over? They could continue channeling that energy into public projects and democratic involvement, or redirect it into something more profitable and easier to manage. The American industry decided for us when they realized their manufacturing engine was capable of producing unprecedented amounts of goods. So they persuaded the public that buying those products was not a luxury or a pastime, but a duty. Freedom became the freedom to choose between brands. Success became square footage, and security became insurance policies and retirement accounts. The language of the marketplace began to take over the language of citizenship. Patron culture, what America values today. Today, America measures a citizen's loyalty not in sacrifice or service, but in economic participation. You can see this clearly in the post-war suburban boom of the 1950s, when the image of the ideal American family was not a family engaged in civic life, but a family in a house packed with new appliances, a new car in the driveway, and a shopping routine that stimulated the economy. Being a good American became inseparable from owning the right things in the right neighborhood. The Cold War strengthened this connection. For 30 years, the United States didn't just tell citizens that communism was dangerous. It told them that capitalism was patriotic, that consumption was proof of superiority, and that prosperity measured in material goods was evidence of national strength. And with the invention of consumer credit, buying things now and paying later was normalized, ensuring that consumption never slowed. Tax structures, deregulation, and corporate lobbying incentivized businesses to treat people not as citizens, but as revenue streams. The modern corporation perfected a cycle in which a person's anxieties are created, amplified, and then sold back to them as solutions through products, services, and upgrades. Civic identity collapsed into economic identity. Then came the point where we were no longer shocked by it. After the September 11th attacks, President Bush said the best way to respond to national tragedy was to go shopping. The message was unmistakable. Your country needs you to spend, not to think, organize, or participate. Black Friday used to be a ritual of door-busting chaos. Now, it's evolved into an everyday online habit. Consumption is no longer something we do. It is something we believe in, where identity and belonging are outsourced to brands. And perhaps the most revealing indicator of all is that when we talk about the health of the nation, instead of talking about the well-being of the people, we talk about the stock market, the housing market, consumer confidence, interest rates, productivity, quarterly earnings, and GDP. America measures its success the same way a corporation does, which makes sense because the culture has trained us to behave like consumers first and citizens second. But if growth is the only universal American value, why are we unhappy, exhausted, and lonely? Why do we still feel like something is missing? What we lose when we become patrons. People have always traded, bought, and wanted nice things. That's not unusual. What is new, however, is that consumption is at the very center of American identity, leaving no room for parts of life that are actually meaningful. In a patron culture, nothing is allowed to exist simply because it matters. Everything has to justify its existence economically. Art isn't valuable unless it sells. Education isn't valuable unless it raises income. Health isn't valuable unless it increases productivity. And even relationships are judged by whether they are worth the investment. And when everything is commodified, people begin to commodify themselves. Identity becomes a product to assemble rather than a character to develop, with appearance, clothing brands, subscription services, curated hobbies, and vacation photos serving as evidence that we are keeping up. Self-worth becomes fragile because it depends on external validation instead of internal conviction, and the moment the money stops, the identity collapses. The social consequences are just as severe. When people stop seeing themselves as participants of a shared society and start seeing themselves as isolated economic units, trust erodes. Neighbors become strangers, and coworkers become competitors. Patron culture also strips away the sense of agency that patriot culture once tried to instill. If you are raised to believe your role is to consume rather than to shape the world, you stop believing that your actions matter, politically, socially, or morally. People disengage not because they don't care, but because they've been trained to believe caring doesn't change anything, and that the only realistic way to respond to stress, inequality, or injustice is to buy something that makes you feel better for a little while. The tragedy is that patron culture promises satisfaction through accumulation, but it delivers emptiness through substitution. It tells us that we don't need meaning, we just need things. And if the emptiness grows, that's not a sign that the system is failing us. It's a sign that we haven't bought enough yet. The true cost of becoming patrons is not financial, it's existential. We traded purpose for comfort, connection for convenience, contribution for consumption, and yet the emptiness remains. Because what we really needed wasn't another purchase, it was a place in a story bigger than ourselves. What's next? America didn't become this way by accident. We were manipulated, slowly and deliberately, into believing that comfort equals purpose, and that a strong economy equals a strong society. But somewhere beneath all the noise and advertising, we still yearn for patriotism, the desire to belong to something worth protecting, something worth improving, something that lasts longer than we do. We don't need to abandon modern life to find purpose. We only need to remember that consumption is supposed to support a meaningful life, not replace one. There's a part of you that remembers you are more than a customer, and that your value was never supposed to be measured in what you own. Patriot culture wasn't perfect, and it wasn't fair to everyone, but it held on to one truth that patron culture desperately wants us to forget. A nation is built by people, not by products.